At the start of the movie, a car stops outside a house. A girl notices it from her bedroom window and goes outside to investigate. She examines the car but finds it empty. Before she can figure out anything, someone calls her name from behind. She moves to the back of the house to check but finds no one. Suddenly, a man appears, and just as he starts to say something about her being the almost birthday girl, the scene abruptly cuts off. The focus shifts to an FBI department meeting, where the boss briefs the team about a case involving a serial offender. A young new agent named Lee Harker is introduced. Lee teams up with her partner, Agent Fisk, and they head to a neighborhood for the investigation. Fisk instructs Lee to stay back while he questions neighbors about the suspect. However, sensing something unusual, Lee steps out and notices a specific house. When Fisk returns, she tells him the suspect is in house number 3525 and suggests calling it in, but Fisk dismisses her intuition. He decides to check it out himself and knocks on the door. The moment it opens, he is shot in the head and taken out instantly. Terrified, Lee enters the house to investigate and finds a man in one of the rooms, who quietly surrenders without resistance. Later, Lee is in an interrogation room, participating in a test where she says the first word that comes to mind for each image shown. Afterward, she is asked to state a number between 0 and 100 that comes to her mind. Later, Lee is with agents Carter and Browning. Carter notes that she beat the number generator 8 times and asks how she managed it. Lee responds that she missed it 8 times as well. Carter remarks that half psychic is better than not psychic at all. He then briefs her on the Horn family, who had lived in house 3525 for 12 years. 2 months earlier, the family of 4 was slaughtered inside. Browning adds that technically there were 3 slaughters and 1 S-word. The father attacked his wife 61 times before the knife broke. Carter explains that a coded letter, not in the handwriting of anyone connected to the family, was found with the bodies. They have 10 similar letters from the past 30 years, all linked to 10 houses and 10 families. Each letter is signed with the word Longlegs. He theorizes that someone or something is influencing the fathers to commit these crimes, but so far, they have no concrete answers. Browning expresses doubt about Lee's readiness for the case, but Carter insists they need her. Carter later brings Lee to his office and asks for her account of the Colfax incident and the shooting of Fisk. Lee describes a sensation like something tapping her shoulder, guiding her attention. When asked if this has happened before, she admits it does occasionally. Carter then asks her what she sees in the case. Lee inquires about commonalities between the families. Carter explains that all the families had daughters with birthdays on the 14th of a month, but only the Horns were slayed on that specific date. Lee dives deep into the investigation, spending so much time at the scene that she eventually falls asleep there. That night, Carter takes her out for a drink and asks about her progress. Lee notes that there were no signs of forced entry in the slaughters. Forensics found no evidence of the suspect's presence in the houses, except for the victims' bodies. The weapons, shotguns, knives, or hammers, were always objects from inside the homes. Twice, it was a shotgun legally registered to the father. 8 times, it was a kitchen knife. And once, it was a hammer from a toolbox. Lee points out that Longlegs must have been inside the houses to use these weapons, yet no physical evidence supports his presence. Without the letters he left behind, it would seem as though he was never there at all. Carter remarks that the slayer seems to take out his victims, but not in person, prompting Lee to suggest that he might be instructing the families to harm themselves and each other. Carter comments that this resembles Manson's methods, to which Lee points out that Manson had accomplices. Carter then asks if she thinks Longlegs might have help. Since Carter is drunk, Lee drives him home. He invites her inside to meet his wife, Anna, and daughter, Ruby. Ruby takes Lee to her room and asks if she has always wanted to be an FBI agent. Lee admits she once dreamed of being an actress, to which Ruby remarks that it messes up kids. Ruby then asks if being a female FBI agent is scary, and Lee confirms that it is. Anna interrupts, suggesting Lee has important work to do. Before Lee leaves, Ruby asks if she will come to her birthday party. Anna encourages Ruby to ask Lee herself, and Lee agrees to attend. Later that night, Lee calls her mother to check in. During the conversation, it is revealed that Lee's birthday is approaching. Suddenly, Lee hears noises outside and abruptly ends the call, promising to call back later. As she hangs up, there's a loud knock on the door. Lee cautiously approaches but, after getting no response, decides not to open it. Turning on the outside lights, she sees a silhouette in the distance. Grabbing her gun, Lee steps outside to investigate, but finds no one. When she turns back, she notices someone inside her house. Lee rushes back inside and discovers a letter left behind. The envelope reads, "Do not open until January 14th. Ignoring the instruction, she opens it to find a birthday card from Longlegs with a coded message. After decoding it, she learns that her mother has been threatened. Shortly after, she receives a call from the department, informing her that Carter is looking for her. The next morning, Lee arrives at a crime scene, where Carter confirms that the same criminal has struck again. He mentions that the family seemed to have been planning a trip, and a friend assumed they were away, which delayed the discovery of the massacres. Lee asks if the girl's birthday was on the 14th, and Carter confirms that it seems to be the case. As Lee decodes the new letter, Carter asks how she manages to decipher them, and she replies that she just looks long enough. Inside the house, they learn that the father was found in the garage with self-inflicted wounds on his wrists and throat, likely using a kitchen knife. The team plans further checks to confirm the details. Lee inquires how long ago the incidents occurred, and an agent responds that it was about a month ago. Carter asks to see the victims' bodies, while Lee asks the girl's age, and the agent estimates she was 9 or 10 years old. Later, Lee calls her mother to inform her she will be busy with work and might not make it home. Her mother asks if she'll visit for her birthday, and Lee says she'll try. Her mother reminds her to keep saying her prayers for protection from evil, and Lee assures her before ending the call. As Lee continues her investigation, she uncovers a similar case from the 1970s connected to a satanic cult. She learns about a 13-year-old victim named Andrea, who was slayed on November 16th. While analyzing the dates of passing of all the victims, Lee hears noises and senses a presence nearby, but chooses to ignore them, staying focused on her work. Lee opens a book titled 9 Circles of Hell and begins connecting dates from the slaughters with lines on paper, forming an inverted triangle. The next day, she tells Carter that it's an algorithm. She explains that the first incident occurred on July 14, 1966, and subsequent slaughters happened within 6 days of the daughters' birthdays, either before or after, creating the triangular pattern. Carter asks what he is supposed to do with this information, and Lee reveals she has decoded all the letters. She points out a recurring reference to the fine time we had at the Camera family farm, where X's mark the spot. Carter mentions being at Georgetown during that time, and Lee adds details about a local priest's visit to the Camera farm that ended violently. Carrie Ann's father used an axe from the tool shed to take out the priest, his wife, and him. Carrie Ann, who was at school at the time, survived. Lee highlights that the date of the incidents, March 8th, is 6 days before Ann's birthday, March 14th. She suggests that Longlegs was at the farm during those events, and that Carrie Ann might have seen him. Carter asks if she is still alive, and Lee confirms Carrie Ann resides at the Water Rock Psychiatric Hospital. Carter and Lee first decide to visit the Camera family farm. Following the X markings, they find a crucifix nailed to the floor. Carter removes some wooden planks from the area, revealing a piece of paper with a triangle drawn on it. Digging further, they uncover a life-sized doll. When Carter picks it up, its eyes suddenly open. Disturbed, they bring the doll back to have it examined. A doctor inspects the doll, describing it as handmade with a porcelain head, hands and feet, an unbleached canvas body, and cotton stuffing. He notes that the hair is human, though sparse. Inside the doll's head, he finds a metal ball, which he calls its brain. As he makes Carter and Lee listen to the sound it produces, Lee experiences a vivid vision. She sees a snake, followed by an image of the doll, and then Longlegs, who taunts her, saying he knows she is no longer afraid of the dark because she is the darkness. He covers her with a black cloth, and she snaps out of the vision, as the doctor comments about the doll. The doctor explains that the previous night, the doll whispered his ex-wife's name repeatedly, but he dismissed it as a result of late nights. Carter asks if the brain can be opened, but the doctor insists there's nothing inside. Meanwhile, Longlegs is seen at a hardware store, purchasing various items. When the cashier asks if he needs help with anything else, he places her hands over his eyes and says, "Cuckoo." The confused girl responds that she doesn't know what he means. He then asks her what day is her birthday. Disturbed, the girl calls for her dad, shouting that the gross guy is back again. On his way out, Longlegs screams to himself about wanting to escape the torment of life. Carter and Lee visit the Water Rock Psychiatric Hospital, where they learn from the doctor that Carrie Ann is catatonic. However, he notes that the day before, she unexpectedly became alert after a visitor's arrival. He describes the transformation as if someone flipped a switch in her mind. Carter asks if the doctor saw the visitor, but he admits he wasn't on site at the time, suggesting they check the visitor log for details. Lee finds her name on the hospital visitor register and asks the guard if IDs are checked for visitors. The guard explains that they do not require them. Lee proceeds to speak with Ann, who insists she has seen Lee before. Though Lee denies it, Ann is adamant, suggesting she has been to Lee's house or seen someone who looks like her. When Lee asks how Ann is feeling, Ann describes it as being different, like waking from a long dark dream or a limbo. Lee tries to prompt Ann's memory, asking if she recalls anything before this long dream, such as arriving at the hospital or her parents. Ann recounts that her parents didn't know how to handle her, and that she was a difficult child. However, she insists her father was a good man, which is why she believes he did what he did. Lee brings up Ann's visitor from the previous day, and asks her to describe him. Ann responds that she doesn't ever want to forget him, and that she has been waiting for him to tell her something to do. She mentions she would do anything he asked, even something as extreme as jumping out a window, or taking someone out with her bare hands if he commanded it. When Lee asks if Ann remembers owning a special doll resembling her, Ann denies it, cryptically adding that she doesn't remember either. Later, Lee tells Carter about Ann's sudden recovery from catatonia, coinciding with the discovery of the doll. Carter dismisses this as a coincidence, mentioning that nothing was found inside the metal ball in the doll's head. Lee speculates that they might be missing some element that makes it work, noting that dolls are used in certain cultures for magical purposes to control others. Carter reacts skeptically, questioning the idea of Longlegs remotely slaughtering people using a doll. He insists Longlegs is just a man, not a witch doctor. Carter shifts the conversation, pointing out how quickly the case has progressed since Lee joined the investigation. He reveals that he reviewed her background file and asks when she last spoke with her mother. When Lee questions the relevance, Carter explains that her mother filed a police report on January 13, 1974, the day before Lee's 9th birthday, reporting a tall, pale trespasser near their home. Carter suggests Lee visit her mother to uncover any memories related to that incident. Lee visits her mother, Ruth, who questions if Lee still says her prayers. Lee admits she never did because they frightened her. Ruth laughs, saying their prayers didn't help them anyway. While preparing something for Ruth to eat, Lee hears a noise and goes to investigate. She sees an insect emerging from behind a closed door, triggering a vision of a snake and a flashback to her childhood. In the memory, Ruth tells her that she arranged for someone to cover her shift tomorrow because it's someone's birthday. As Lee moves toward the door, she glimpses her mother in the bathroom, scrubbing something forcefully. A sudden noise startles Ruth, prompting her to come out and check. She attempts to use the phone, only to find it isn't working. Ruth instinctively grabs a gun from a drawer, her movements quick and decisive, before the scene shifts back to her conversation with Lee. Ruth comments on how quickly time flies, marveling that it's almost Lee's birthday again. She begins reminiscing about a vague incident, mentioning how much she bled that day, but Lee interrupts, steering the conversation toward her 9th birthday. Ruth claims not to remember much, turning the question back on Lee. When pressed further, Ruth becomes evasive, insisting that the memory of a trespasser is something Lee imagined as a child. She cryptically adds that Lee is no longer a child because she was allowed to grow up, unlike many others in a cruel world where not all of them get to live. Confused and unsettled, Lee asks what Ruth means. Ruth admits that she's blocked out many things, but insists she never discarded anything from that time. She directs Lee to her old room, where everything has been preserved. Lee searches through a box of old belongings and stumbles upon a stack of photographs. As she flips through them, fragmented memories flood back. Visions of her childhood, a tall, pale man, and the moment she captured his image with a camera. The vision becomes more vivid. The man, Longlegs, stood outside her home, speaking to her in a sing-song tone as her mother burst out, demanding to know who he was. Instead of answering, he began singing a haunting melody, his presence looming large over the frightened family. Snapping out of the memory, Lee finds the photo she took of Longlegs and rushes to Carter. Showing him the image, she confirms that it's the man they've been hunting. Shortly after, Longlegs is apprehended at a bus stop, surrendering without resistance as the police surround him. In the interrogation room, the man identifies himself as Dale Ferdinand Cobble. When asked about the alias Longlegs, he deflects, requesting to see Lee Harker. The officer presses him on how he knows Lee, to which Cobble cryptically replies that a friend of a friend of a friend asked him to deliver a message. "Happy birthday, Lee Harker." He then begins to sing the birthday song, drawing out each word with eerie precision. Browning, overseeing the tape, cuts it off, explaining that Cobble continued singing for 24 minutes straight. Browning briefs Lee and Carter afterward, revealing that Cobble's luggage was filled with notebooks matching the letters sent to victims' families. The content is heavily satanic, filled with disturbing references. However, Browning admits that there's no tangible evidence linking Cobble to any slaughters, only his obsessive writings and cryptic statements. She warns that while Cobble's knowledge of Lee is concerning, his actions alone don't prove guilt. Lee, unshaken, recites a passage from the Book of Revelation. Browning identifies the quote, but Lee corrects her grammar, emphasizing that it's not plural. She insists Cobble isn't working alone. Someone, possibly a child or someone who could pass as one, has been aiding him, gaining the trust of families and enabling the massacres. Carter remains skeptical, arguing that Cobble is their culprit, the author of the letters, and that he will face justice. But Lee reminds them that the triangle isn't complete. The 13th is today, and they're missing a crucial piece. Browning, unsettled, asks what they should do next. The room falls into a tense silence, the weight of the impending day hanging over them. Lee predicts that his accomplice will take out at least one more family, and Cobble is the only one who knows who it will be. When Lee asks where Cobble is, Browning says he is downstairs, right under her feet. Lee recalls Longlegs mentioning to Ruth that he is a friend of a friend who lives downstairs. When Ruth asks, downstairs from where? He answers everywhere, adding that she can call him Mr. Downstairs. Lee proceeds to interrogate Longlegs. As Lee enters the room, Longlegs greets her with a remark about her upcoming birthday. She sits across from him, and he recalls laughing when she chose to pursue law enforcement at age 20, though only he laughed, not her. When Lee asks who she is, Longlegs cryptically refers to the seventh she. He explains that it's about facing a choice: accept the gift and destroy it along with oneself, or keep it, submit, and engage in work that dirties as it cleans, like a mop. Lee questions whether Longlegs works alone, and if someone has been helping him. He cryptically responds with, "Knock knock," and describes a scenario. A woman with a Bible and a message at the farmhouse door, informing the residents they've been chosen to collect their gift from the church. He says it's all by orders of the man downstairs, and describes the farmhouse as so bright and white, it can't be missed. Lee asks if he is referring to Carrie Ann Camera and what he said to her at the mental institution. Longlegs replies that Carrie Ann's house was even whiter when he visited. Lee presses him about January 13, 1974, and Longlegs confirms that Lee's house number 8, was exceptionally white, a reflection of the immaculate work being done. Lee declares that his work is finished and he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Longlegs agrees but ominously adds that he will still be everywhere, waiting in the father's wings. When Lee demands to know who has been helping him, Longlegs deflects, telling her to start her own investigation. When she asks who the man downstairs is, he suggests she ask her mother. Lee insists her mother knows nothing, but Longlegs responds with, "Hail Satan," then violently bangs his head on the table, scaring Lee before taking himself out. Later, Carter tells Lee it's over. They had Longlegs, but now they have nothing. Families have died, and nothing about that is okay, but it's done. He informs Lee that while she was in the interrogation room, Carrie Ann Camera jumped off the roof at Water Rock, likely following Longlegs' earlier influence. Carter assures Lee that Longlegs acted alone, with no accomplices, no black magic, and no supernatural forces involved. Browning drives Lee to her mother's house. When asked how she wants to proceed, Lee decides to go in alone and tell her mother they need to bring her in for questioning. Lee decides to explain to her mother that they believe she could help identify the accomplice. As she enters the house, a gunshot rings out. Lee looks out the window and sees her mother, Ruth, shooting Browning. Shocked, Lee rushes outside, demanding that Ruth put the gun down. She notices a doll nearby and asks Ruth about it. Ruth replies how she caught him, and now he is free. Lee insists that Cobble has passed away and it's over, but Ruth counters by saying that you are free too, before shooting the doll. Smoke emerges from Lee's head as she collapses, and she watches smoke rise from the doll's head before fainting. In a flashback, Ruth tells Lee about how they were always alone, until one day a doll maker visited their home. He worked his dark magic, leaving a piece of himself in every doll. The devil wanted Lee for himself, but Ruth begged for her daughter's life. In exchange, Ruth agreed to help him. Once a nurse, she became a slaughterer of families. Her role was simple: knock on the farmhouse door with a Bible and a congratulatory message, deliver the doll, and ensure the devil's plan succeeded. The devil, hiding within the dolls, handled the rest. This was the deal Ruth made to protect Lee. Lee wakes up in the basement. Hearing a phone ring, she goes upstairs and answers it. The devil tells her she is late for Miss Ruby's birthday party. Panicked, Lee rushes to Carter's house, where Carter and his wife warmly greet her. When Lee asks if everything is okay, Carter assures her it is, and mentions that Ruby has just started opening her presents. As Lee enters, she is shocked to see her mother there, and Ruby playing with a doll. Lee urgently tells Carter that her mother is the accomplice, but Carter brushes it off and invites her to sit. When Anna suggests bringing out the cake, Carter agrees, saying he will find something to cut it with. After Anna and Carter leave for the kitchen, Ruth tells Lee that the woman, Anna, has already passed away, and the little girl, Ruby, will be next. Ruth explains that all three of them, Lee, Ruby, and Anna, must perish to prevent eternal torment in hell. She insists she is doing it for Lee, just as she always has, to ensure Lee grows up and fulfills her destiny. Ruth declares she will continue until Lee stands upon the sand of the sea and witnesses a beast rise from it. Lee acts quickly, pulling Ruby away from the doll. When Carter returns, now intent on taking out Ruby, Lee shoots him lifeless. Enraged, Ruth lunges at Ruby, but Lee fires again, slaying her mother. Lee pulls Ruby away from the doll once more and tries to destroy it, only to realize she is out of bullets. The scene shifts to Longlegs, singing "Happy Birthday" for Lee with an increasingly sinister tone. As he finishes, he chants, "Hail Satan," and the screen fades to black, ending the story.